60 million, that number. It's almost impossible to grasp. 60 million lives lost in World War II.
The deadliest conflict in human history by far.
Empires shattered, the world map redrawn, a completely new global order born from it.
And that's what we're diving into today. This wasn't something that just happened overnight, was it?
No, not at all. Its roots, they smolder in the aftermath of the First World War.
Absolutely. You really have to look back at the Treaty of Versailles. Intended to bring peace, but well.
It kind of did the opposite in some ways, for Germany at least.
For Germany, it was devastating. Humiliation, massive reparations they couldn't possibly pay, losing territory.
And that blame, right. Article 231, the war guilt clause.
Exactly. Being assigned sole responsibility for World War I that created this deep, simmering resentment. National humiliation.
Fertile ground for extremism, I suppose.
Precisely. It fostered this sense, this deep unfairness. And it shows how trying to enforce peace with really punitive measures can backfire.
Yeah, it can breed instability instead.
Right. And into that mix, that resentment, steps Adolf Hitler.
Promising to restore German pride, to tear up Versailles.
He tapped into those grievances masterfully, offered simple answers, scapegoats.
And his message resonated.
Powerfully. People were desperate,
Yeah.
Economic hardship, national shame. He promised recovery, strength. His oratory was effective.
And by 1933, he's chancellor.
And moves incredibly fast. Dismantles democracy, establishes the Nazi dictatorship. The fuse was well and truly lit.
So the rhetoric starts turning into action, annexing Austria, the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia.
And the international response was, well, muted initially. Appeasement.
Until Poland, September 1st, 1939. Germany invades. Why was that the breaking point?
It crossed the final line. Britain and France had drawn that line, issued warnings.
They'd guaranteed Poland's independence.
Exactly. When the tanks rolled in, it was clear Hitler's ambitions went far beyond just reclaiming lost land. Appeasement was over. They had to declare war.
And it's crucial, I think, to remember this wasn't just a European powder keg waiting to explode.
Oh, absolutely not. You had Japan's expansionism in Asia.
Invading Manchuria way back in 31, then China in 37.
And Italy, under Mussolini, invading Ethiopia.
Yeah.
These were earlier acts of aggression.
And the world's reaction then? Or lack thereof?
Well, the League of Nations proved pretty ineffective, didn't it?
Kind of toothless.
Yeah. And that inaction arguably emboldened Germany, Italy, and Japan.
Yeah.
They likely thought, well, we can get away with this.
So war erupts in Europe, and it spreads incredibly fast.
Terrifyingly fast. Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands. They fall like dominoes.
And then France, the fall of France in 1940 in just 6 weeks. That must have been a massive shock.
A profound shock. It showcased Germany's new tactic.
Blitzkrieg.
Lightning war. Yeah. Speed, surprise, tanks, air power, all coordinated. It's just overwhelmed defenses. Revolutionary, really.
Leaving Britain standing alone.
Britain alone, under Churchill, refusing to buckle.
Facing the Blitz, those relentless bombing raids. How did they hold on?
Well, geography helped, being an island. The Royal Navy controlled the seas. But Churchill's leadership, his speeches, his defiance, that was absolutely crucial for morale. Galvanized the nation.
Shows the power of leadership in a crisis, definitely.
No question.
Then, June 1941, Hitler makes what many call his biggest mistake.
Invading the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa.
Opening up that massive Eastern Front. Why was this such a critical, maybe fatal decision?
Fighting a war on two major fronts like that, it stretched German resources incredibly thin.
And Russia itself.
The sheer size is one thing. Then you have the brutal Russian winter, which the German army wasn't prepared for.
Right.
And the Soviet resistance. They were pushed back initially, yes, but it was fierce, relentless. It just absorbed so much German strength, a turning point in the making.
Meanwhile, across the world, Japan's ambitions in the Pacific are escalating.
They wanted dominance in Asia, the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere.
Which brings us to December 7th, 1941.
Pearl Harbor, a date which will live in infamy.
The surprise attack that pulls the United States into the war. How did one event just flip American opinion like that?
It was pretty isolationist before, wasn't it?
Very much so. There was a huge debate about getting involved. But Pearl Harbor, it was seen as this treacherous, unprovoked attack on American soil.
It unified the country instantly.
Exactly. The isolationist sentiment just evaporated overnight. America was going to war.
And the U.S. entry, that changes everything, doesn't it? The industrial power alone.
Monumental. The arsenal of democracy, they called it. American factories started churning out planes, tanks, ships on an unbelievable scale.
And manpower, too.
Millions of Americans mobilized. This massive influx of resources and troops fundamentally shifted the balance of power globally. It gave the Allies the overwhelming strength they needed long term.
So by 1942, this is truly a world war, fighting everywhere.
North Africa, the Atlantic, the Pacific Islands, bombing raids over Europe, jungles, deserts, oceans, cities, everywhere.
An unprecedented scale.
A level of global conflict never seen before. And amidst all this, the darkest chapter, the Holocaust.
Hard to even talk about. Hitler's regime, the systematic murder.
Jews, Roma, LGBTQ plus individuals, political opponents, disabled people.
6 million Jewish people murdered in the concentration camps alone. It's staggering.
And it's so important to stress this wasn't just collateral damage of war, was it?
Absolutely not. It was deliberate, planned genocide, rooted in Nazi racist ideology.
The industrial scale of it? Auschwitz, the gas chamber.
It underscores the systematic horror, a crime against humanity itself.
So 1942, the Axis powers seem almost unstoppable in some ways, but the tide is starting to turn.
Yes, slowly but surely.
Yeah.
A major turning point comes on that Eastern Front we mentioned.
Stalingrad.
The Battle of Stalingrad. Just brutal street-to-street fighting, city blocks changing hands multiple times a day.
The losses were immense, right?
Astronomical. Over 2 million casualties combined. But the German Sixth Army eventually gets encircled.
And surrenders in February 43.
Yes. A massive strategic defeat for Hitler. It halts the German advance in the east, and the Soviets begin that long, slow push west towards Berlin.
At the same time, things are happening in North Africa.
Right. The Allies, particularly the British, defeat Rommel's Afrika Korps. Battles like El Alamein are key.
What was the significance of winning in North Africa?
It secured vital supply lines in the Mediterranean, and it opened the door
to Europe from the south.
Exactly. The invasion of Sicily, then mainland Italy in 1943.
Mussolini is overthrown.
Yes, but the Germans dig in. Italy becomes this long, hard slog for the Allies, but it ties down German troops, opens another front.
Which leads us to the big one, the Western Front. D-Day, June 6th, 1944.
The largest amphibious invasion in history, Normandy landings.
An incredible undertaking. Why was opening this front so absolutely vital?
It forced Germany into that major two-front war in the West. It always feared Italy from the south, France from the west, alongside the massive Eastern Front.
Squeezing them from all sides.
Precisely. D-Day allows the Allies to pour troops and supplies into France, break out from Normandy.
And liberate France, Paris, in August 44.
A huge moment, strategically and symbolically. The pressure on Germany is now immense.
Bombing raids on German cities intensifying. Berlin getting hammered.
Resources dwindling, morale collapsing on the home front and on the troops.
And as Allied troops advance from both east and west, they start discovering
the camps, Auschwitz, Buchenwald, Dachau. The full, horrific reality of the Holocaust is laid bare.
The photos, the newsreels, unimaginable.
It shocked the world. Revealed the depths of Nazi barbarity.
So the final stages in Europe, April 1945.
The Soviets reach Berlin. Fierce fighting in the city streaks.
A nailer.
Facing the inevitable, he commits suicide in his bunker on April 30th.
And Germany surrenders soon after.
Yes, unconditional surrender on May 7th, 1945. VE Day. Victory in Europe.
Huge celebrations, obviously. But the war wasn't actually over yet.
No. The fight against Japan in the Pacific was still raging, and Japan was fighting fiercely.
Iwo Jima, Okinawa, incredibly bloody battles, the kamikaze attacks.
Japanese resistance was fanatical. The projected casualties for a U.S. invasion of the Japanese home islands were terrifyingly high.
Yeah.
Millions, potentially.
Which leads to one of the most controversial decisions in history.
The use of the atomic bomb.
Hiroshima, August 6, 1945. Then Nagasaki, August 9th.
The devastation was unprecedented. Over 200,000 civilians killed immediately or from the aftermath.
A terrible choice with terrible consequences.
A deeply debated decision, absolutely. But its immediate effect was Japan's surrender.
August 15th, 1945, the emperor announces the surrender. World War II is finally over.
The fighting stopped, but the consequences, They were just beginning to unfold.
The cost. We said 60 million dead. The physical destruction.
Cities leveled. London, Berlin, Warsaw, Tokyo. Hiroshima and Nagasaki obviously were unique cases, but devastation was widespread.
And the human suffering beyond death.
Millions displaced. Refugees, orphans, famine, disease, a humanitarian crisis on a global scale.
After all that horror, there was a push for accountability, right?
Yes. The Nuremberg trials, starting in late 1945. Top surviving Nazi leaders put on trial.
For what kinds of crimes?
War crimes, crimes against peace, and crucially, crimes against humanity, specifically including the genocide.
How significant were those trials?
Groundbreaking. They established the principle that leaders could be held individually responsible under international law, even for actions taken in the name of the state. A huge step.
But the unity among the victors, the allies, that didn't last long, did it?
No. The cracks were already showing. The ideological divide between the West, the US, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union.
Capitalism versus communism, democracy versus totalitarianism.
It widened rapidly. The wartime alliance fractured, and the Cold War began.
Dividing the world. Germany itself split in two.
East and West Germany. Europe divided by an iron curtain, as Churchill called it. Two opposing blocs armed with nuclear weapons. A standoff that would last for decades.
It's strange, though, amidst all this destruction and division, the war also spurred innovation.
Paradoxically, yes. Wartime necessity is a powerful driver. Radar, jet engines, rockets.
Penicillin saw widespread use.
Huge advances in medicine. And of course, nuclear energy, born from the bomb project. Technology took massive leaps.
And there was an attempt to prevent future wars institutionally.
The United Nations, founded in 1945, replacing the failed League of Nations.
The hope was for collective security, diplomacy.
Forum to resolve disputes peacefully. But the Cold War immediately hampered its effectiveness in many ways, with the veto power in the Security Council still a vital body.
And what about rebuilding? Countries like Germany and Japan were devastated.
Huge rebuilding efforts were undertaken. The Marshall Plan in Europe, U.S. aid to Japan.
And surprisingly, they saw massive economic growth later on.
Yes, the economic miracles in West Germany and Japan. New structures, investment, technology adoption, they recovered remarkably quickly, in economic terms at least.
But we can't gloss over the lasting scars, can we?
Absolutely not. The psychological trauma for survivors for entire generations that lingered.
And the nuclear threat, that shadow hanging over the world ever since.
An existential threat that reshaped global politics and fear. Plus, millions remained displaced long after 1945.
And while old colonial empires crumbled after the war,
new conflicts emerged, often fueled by those Cold War tensions. Korea, Vietnam, the Middle East.
Yeah.
The end of WWII didn't mean the end of war.
Yet looking back, were there any, and it feels strange to ask this, but any sort of positive shifts that came out of that chaos? Unexpected consequences.
It's complex, but you could argue, well, women entered the workforce in huge numbers during the war, changing societal roles, even if temporarily in some places.
Civil rights movements gained momentum in some countries.
Yes. The fight against fascism abroad highlighted hypocrisy at home regarding racial injustice. Science and technology advanced rapidly with peacetime applications too.
And maybe, just maybe, a realization of what global war truly means.
A stark, brutal realization. A sense, however fragile, that something like this must never happen again. The UN, international laws, they stem from that hope.
World War II, undeniably a massive turning point, a horrific, costly lesson.
One we absolutely must never forget.
Because ultimately, in a war on that scale, there really are no winners, are there?
No, the cost is just too profound. And reflecting on that immense scale, its echoes today, it really forces you to think about how those events still shape our present and what our responsibility is, collectively, to ensure history doesn't repeat itself in such a devastating way.